3.9% body fat. You might be listening today to the leanest person to ever walk the face of the earth. That is Robert Sikes, who is a natural bodybuilder, who is the owner of Keto Brick. Previously, if you look it up, if you Google it, and you try to look up the leanest person of all time, you will find Helmut Struble. So you can listen to Helmut Struble, or today you can listen to our guest, Robert Sikes, who got a 3.9% DEXA scan. Strength is never weak. This week is never strength. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the single digit body fat series.
Strength is never weak. This week is never strength.
Figure out a way to just be less fat. And you know what that means.
What enough will happen if I go all in on this? Today I'm going to tell you how to get ridiculously shredded.
All right, everybody, welcome to the single digit body fat series. We got Robert Sikes, who not only has gotten into single digit body fat, but went even beyond cutting down from like 12% all the way down into like 4% or 3.9% or something like that.
Yeah, 3.9 in 2023. I did 5 shows, but my whole goal with that year was to become the leanest man on planet Earth for that time. So that's what I strive for.
I don't think you were able to beat Ronnie Coleman, who was like 0.375 when he was on Joe Rogan. I don't know if you heard that.
I think he said -2. I think
-2. Yeah,
I didn't get that lean.
You know what's interesting about that? In Ronnie Coleman's defense, I would imagine that he's not normal.
No.
So he can't. I mean, if we're trying to measure ourselves, the 3 of us, 4 of us, against Ronnie Coleman, he's a different breed.
Yeah, he's a different species.
So like if you get, 4%, I get 8%, you get 10% or whatever, it makes sense that Ronnie Coleman would be -2. Yeah. You can't find a machine to measure him.
No, he's savage for sure, man, by every definition of the word.
Anyway, we're going to try to figure this out. And we're going to try to figure this out today on how to get into single digit body fat. So just share with us a little bit of your experience and how you were able to get into those body fat percentages that are super low.
So I do strict keto. I've been doing strict keto for 10 years.
People
and I've
just shut the thing right off.
I know. I used to do bro dieting and if it fits your macros and flexible dieting, all that stuff. But strict keto is what I've found to be more sustainable and better from a body fat standpoint. But I've got like a 7-phase protocol that I go through. So we can go as deep into that as y'all want, but I'll typically start at a high fat ratio. So 80% of my calories coming from fat at about a maintenance caloric intake. And then from there, my protein's obviously pretty low because 80% is coming from fat. I'll titrate my protein up, my fat down until I find my protein threshold. And then from there, I start dropping both fat and protein until I'm getting down to around 1,800 calories, 1,900 calories. And then I'll introduce ketogenic caloric refeeds with a bolus of both fat and protein, tweak electrolytes a little bit, kind of mimic a peak week. And then phase 5 is the peak week itself. So I'll actually start, honing things in for when I step on stage. And then from there, I transition into a reverse diet and then back to a healthy baseline and kind of a slight surplus for a building phase. But by transitioning through those 7 phases, I was able to get down to the 3.9% body fat.
These weeks and this amount of time is fairly important. I'm sure you probably have done it before where you kind of rushed it. I'm sure that you maybe tried it with clients where you sort of rushed over step 1 and 2 and just went right into 3, 4, and 5. Mm-hmm. And what's the results been when you don't have the time?
Well, especially if you're natural, I lost 80 pounds in 12 weeks before, but I lost a whole bunch of muscle in the process. So now, my last prep was 33 weeks long to do those 5 shows. And I lost, I started at 182 and I got down to 152 at my lightest over that 33-week span. And if you do it, more gradually like that, you can make it more sustainable, like you're tapering away like a tablespoon of heavy cream or 1 egg a week as opposed to like a whole meal. So it's not that noticeable, which makes it more sustainable. And then you can maintain training stimulus and intensity so you don't risk losing a lot of lean tissue, and it just becomes more enjoyable. But once you get beyond about 6-7 months, then you're kind of in the point of diminishing returns because then you're just super depleted for too long, and then you'll start losing lean tissue. So that's why you got to reverse diet back up to a healthy maintenance.
Now, just because I saw you do it when we had dinner the other night, you still are tracking your macros though.
Yeah, I pretty much track everything depending on my goal. Like I had 2 months at the end of last year where I ate intuitively, November, December, to give myself a break because I had tracked everything meticulously for the 18 months leading up to that point. But then, when I've got a goal in mind, like I'm tracking everything, I'm weighing everything out, I've got it all, dialed in, and I could just really hone things in. But when I'm at a maintenance intuitively eating, I'm just overeating typically.
Yeah, I wanted to point that part out because I just don't want people to get the misconception that you're saying just go keto and you don't have to worry about if it fits your macros.
No, I definitely track the macros for sure.
Yeah.
Something that we say quite a bit on the Power Project is why not do both?
Yeah,
you know,
100%.
sometimes it's like, oh, I'm doing carnivore, so I don't need to worry about my calories at all. And well, okay, maybe that might be true, but if you're trying to remember, this series is called the Single Digit Body Fat Series, and when you're going to get that serious about something, it's going to take extreme measures, and you might have to dial in and pay attention to every little detail. I mentioned to you earlier that I personally don't actually track my calories. I don't write them down. It's not in an app. I don't prep meals. I don't do any of that stuff. However, everything is still tracked. Everything's still meticulous. There's still a lot of thought that goes into each meal that I have. And when I'm getting leaner, I might experiment and try different things. I might try to eat leaner meats for a little while. It's actually something I just experimented with recently. And guess what? It didn't work. Mm-hmm. It could have worked if I could have beaten it mentally, but it actually became too difficult for me. I was like just sludging through it. The workouts weren't as good. I'm like, I need to bring those fats back up. And so even though I'm not tracking the same way as you are, I'm like scientifically and strategically going through these things, feeling them out, see how they go, and then, I'm going to change over here, I'm going to change over there, much like you might manipulate the calories.
Yeah, a lot of people, carnivore and keto are obviously very popular right now. A lot of people will do that, and they'll see a lot of tremendous benefit because they're able to eat intuitively once they remove all the carbohydrates, and they'll lose a lot of weight, they'll clean up their diet and their composition. But like to take it to the next level and get sub 10% body fat, like it's not natural to get that lean. So you have to kind of do things that are not natural, which takes the intuitive eating out of the equation to some extent, because your body wants to fight to stay in homeostasis. So it's going to want, like when you start getting leaner, your leptin and ghrelin are going to be, factored in to get you to eat more. So you've got to push past that to do things that are outside the norm.
And I think what you just touched upon right there is why somebody gets leaner when they just stay lean for a long time. It's because at some point it just gets easier. Like your body gets adapted to those hunger signals. If you used to weigh 250 and now you're 220, and you went from 16% body fat to like 12 or something like that, you're going to be probably pretty hungry. But if you stay at 220, it's 220, 230-ish, and you kind of hover back and forth, and you just chill there for 6 months or a year, you're going to notice that over time, it's still probably going to be challenging. It's going to be less and less difficult. That those hunger signals and all that stuff is going to get dampened just a little bit.
Yeah, there's a couple different trains of thought as to set points. Like some people think you've got like a genetic set point that you can't really deviate too much from, like your body always wants to return to that. But I've kind of become of the opinion that once you stay at a given set point long enough, that becomes the new norm. So just figuring out where you want that to be and hitting that, because a lot of people will try and stay far too lean far too long, and then they'll start to notice a downtrend towards the metabolic rate, the hormone function. But if they can find that healthy set point and stay there, they can certainly stay leaner than they were previously.
So now on a higher fat diet, which is ketogenic diet, it's going against the grain that everybody thinks of when it comes to dieting down for bodybuilding, right? It's traditional bodybuilding diet, high protein, high carbs, low fat. You're doing high fat, moderate, would you say, or high protein?
It kind of depends on what phase I'm in of those 7 phases, but I'll start at the high fat. And then even when I'm at a higher protein intake for me, I'm never at a point where my calories from fat are less than that of protein. My total caloric intake from dietary fat is always the macro. It's always higher, but there are times when protein grams will exceed that of fat grams.
Got it. Yeah, just because before we get too lost in all of the weeds, I just wanted to kind of break that part down of like, okay, somebody that does want to cut down, they're going to probably find a lot of information online that is talking about a bodybuilding style diet. But here you became the leanest man on the planet, and you did the exact opposite. Well, I guess maybe the exact opposite's not fair, because you're still, you're cutting weight, so it's kind of on the same wavelength. But what you did was high fat, and it was low carb. Like, what were the pumps like? What was all because you've done both. So like some of those sticking points are going to always be the sticking points when you get into a certain level. You're like, dude, I'm lean. I don't know if I'm going to get any leaner. What were the differences there when it comes to following the traditional bodybuilding diet versus the high fat diet?
Mostly like cognition wise, like I was able to get great pumps throughout the whole thing, no problem there.
Really?
But when I was doing a carbohydrate based diet for my preps, the last month or two, you just walk around like a zombie. Whereas with the ketogenic approach, I'm firing on all 8 cylinders mentally. So like I'm still podcasting, I'm still doing all my business stuff. Like I'm still functioning at a high rate mentally. And I think that's the biggest thing for me because, when you're miserable, when you walk around like a zombie, like life just sucks. And I wanted to make the prep sustainable and weave into my life and my responsibilities. So being able to maintain high cognition and just mental clarity and capability was key for me. And I can't do that with the carbohydrate approach because you're just depleted. But if you've got, even a super lean individual has got body fat they can tap into. And if you're getting your energy from fat, you basically have plenty of energy coming in at all times.
And I want to point out that you wrote a book on this, which was very comprehensive and talks about keto as it pertains to bodybuilding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a labor of love. I think I wrote that in like 2020, but it's like
super thorough,
450 some odd pages or something. And it breaks down the 7 phases and the exact manipulations you make and the exact thing I did to do my competition prep.
Something that I've been kind of messing with for years is protein leveraging. Not necessarily, there's the protein sparing modified fast that some people hear about where you're primarily just jacking your protein way up. You're trying to keep your fats super low. I've played around with that before, but like I mentioned earlier, it's hard. It's hard for me personally to make it work. It could work in spurts. It could work for like a meal or two. It could work for a day or two. But man, I just get ravenously hungry if there's no fat in there. However, with some protein leveraging, just really trying to up the protein or up the volume of your food. Just as an example, let's say you're a couple weeks into not really like a prep, but you're just trying to like lose a little bit of weight. You're just trying to lose a little bit of fat. You don't have a bodybuilding show. You're just recreational and you just want to be a little leaner. Well, maybe you're eating 80-20 ground beef for a while. Well, then maybe you take that some 80-20 ground beef and you mix it with some 85-15. Maybe you take some 90% lean ground beef and mix it with the 85 or whatever combinations that you can figure out. I've even, chopped up a little bit of chicken breast and put that in like an omelet or something like that. You mentioned earlier egg whites. Like why not just dump a little extra egg whites in there? So now it's not so much about like just ramping up the protein, but it's about the volume. Yeah. So we mentioned earlier, we were talking about like satisfaction. Well, something that hits the satisfaction circuits in your brain is your eyes, your eyesight. When you look down and you see that much food, you're like, that's about right for me. Yeah. But if you look down and it's like this little tiny thing, like a can of sardines or something like that might be a good example. Very nutrient dense, but that ain't going to cut it.
Yeah.
That's not enough food. Like it could cut it. It is enough nutrients, and you probably could. I've heard of people doing like sardines for days on end and stuff like that. Technically, you probably could do that, but it's not satisfying. It's not exciting enough. So we need sometimes larger volumes of food, and that's where someone might want to use a little bit of vegetables. That's where someone might want to use, egg whites, chicken breast, even pork is actually pretty lean, ham, things of that nature.
Yeah, when I'm getting really lean, if you're not trying to do a prep and become the leanest man alive, you can target like a 1-to-1 ratio fat to protein, and you can kind of manipulate the things. And if you're increasing protein and dropping fat, your overall calories will drop, so you'll likely lose some weight. But for me, when I'm trying to get sub single digits, I'll typically do like one meal a day, which is a much larger meal, and I prefer that mentally over.
Is it one actual meal, or is there like a little bit of like a eating window, like a 2 or 3 hour eating window?
No, it's one meal. Like when I'm down to like 17, when I'm sub 2,000 calories, I typically do OMAD because I'll have all my calories for that day in one sitting, and that psychologically is more satisfying to me than having multiple smaller meals spread throughout the day that always leave me wanting more. So I'll just have that one meal, and then when it's done, like I enjoy it when I'm eating it, but when it's done, it's okay. Time to get on with the rest of my day and not obsess about food. When I know I've got another meal coming in a couple hours, it's like it's all I think about. But if I know, okay, one and done, kill the day, and then I'll eat again tomorrow. It's just easier.
When does that meal come?
Normally, I'm training in the mornings, and I'll have that meal within 2 hours post-training. So if I'm training at 5, 6, I'll have it 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there, and then I'm just on with the rest of my day.
Yeah, so again, kind of going back to like what you said about like looking down at a big plate of food. What would you tell somebody that would say, well, then, yeah, I'm going to have a bunch of vegetables. I'm going to have some of those magic noodles. I'm going to have a lot of fiber and all these things that cancel out the carbs or whatever, you know. What's like some of the pitfalls with like a high carb, what's it called? Low calorie, high volume type of, we'll just say a plate of food. Like what's some of the drawbacks of that?
Yes, I mean, I used to do that when I was doing, a carbohydrate-based approach, but what I've found is that when I'm that depleted, the fiber kind of hinders the absorption of some of that fat and protein that I'm targeting. And if I'm at a deficit, I'm trying to make the most of every nutrient that I am consuming. So rather than cancel that out with too much fiber, it's going to hinder that absorption. I'd rather just do away with the fiber and then have the highest quality fats and proteins on my plate, make full absorption of it, and then capitalize on that.
Yeah, and then on top of that, the carbs are just going to probably make you hungry for more carbs anyways,
Yeah,
right?
when you start stretching out your stomach unnecessarily via too much volume, like there's some different trains of thought as to how much that stomach distension creates a void that you are wanting to fill. But if you're only eating one meal and it's all fats and proteins, you're not going to get unnecessary distension, and you're not going to have that void.
What about when it comes to, you mentioned eating in the morning, and then you just don't eat with your family later on in the evening? Like, for you personally, like, is there any hurdle there, or what do you suggest to clients? What do you suggest to other people when they're like, but man, 7 p.m. comes around, I really want to eat with my family, or 6 p.m. comes around, I want to, eat with my family and then watch a little TV and eat?
Man, when I'm in a prep, I'm like a machine. Like I flip the switch, and my family's very supportive. I'm blessed in that. Like they'll have their dinner, and I'll have like a glass of water with some electrolytes and sit with them and enjoy the company. But we, as a society, we just fixate far too much on food, and that becomes like relationships are won and lost because of the food on people's plates, which just it just confuses
And
me.
alcohol.
Yeah, and alcohol. And if like I've always
Let's
said,
have a drink. It's like,
if your relationship
have a drink.
Yeah, if your relationship is dependent upon the food on your plate, then it's probably not much of a relationship to begin with, So I just flip the switch and I'm in go mode. But, obviously I try to meet clients where they're at. And if they need that, then we just move the meals around and make maybe that their OMAD approach. Or if they have some calories to work with, we can make them, like a bowl of broth or something. And they could have that like a soup with their family.
I think that's actually a great suggestion. Yeah, maybe you can have I'll actually do in the evening. Sometimes I do bone broth. Sometimes I'll take the Total Carnivore chocolate and I dump that in some hot water. It turns into like an amazing hot chocolate. So there's a lot of options where you can kind of circumvent that with really low calorie things. There's things like Jell-O, and there's all kinds of other things. They're not that enjoyable. They're sometimes not that fun, but at least it's something, right?
Your chocolate hydration is the bomb, man. That was like my staple for my evening meal. I mean, there's 0 calories in it, but I would have that with hot water in the evening. When my family's having their meal, I'll have that hot cocoa, and I got my wife on it, I got my mom on it, I got all my family on it. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, it's like a treat. Yeah. At that point, I think personally, I think there's something sort of magical that happens when you eat in the morning and then you don't eat the rest of the day, and I know some people are like, man, I don't want to go to bed hungry. That I think might take a little getting used to. But I think from a health perspective, I think from a sleep perspective, there's something awesome that happens when you don't have any food in your stomach pretty long before you go to bed.
Yeah.
So anyone listening to this show, this could change your life forever. This could be a game changer. I would say if you can eat, if you go to bed anytime past 8 or 9 p.m., if you can discontinue eating anytime around 3 or 4 o'clock, it could be a huge, huge change for you.
Yeah, and some people have a hard time falling asleep when they're depleted because it's just, their stress hormones are elevated. Like they have a hard time actually relaxing into that parasympathetic state. But just simply having that hot cocoa with the hydration, just having something on your stomach can oftentimes check that box. And once you make the mental shift, you can do anything. So that's what I'd recommend. Yeah,
and if you're kind of thinking that I don't know about that, I think it'll be worse. Do the exact opposite. Have a huge meal right before you try to go to bed. That's terrible.
Track it with an Oura ring or something.
And that's what I was going to say. Every tracker, whether it's an 8 sleep mattress, an Oura ring, they all have a metric on there that will ask you, did you have a meal late last night? Because it looks like you did. And it's like, okay, obviously they know what the heck they're talking about.
Your heart rate's all jacked up and everything.
Yeah, it's like, well, I did wake up in a pool of sweat. So
I mean, people that drink a bunch of alcohol to fall asleep, like they'll fall asleep easier, but then their sleep quality is, subpar. And same thing is happening with food,
Yeah, I thought this was pretty cool. Can you quickly tell us the macros of a keto brick?
So it depends a little bit on the flavor, but most of them around 88 to 90 grams of fat, and then the primal fudge is 43 grams of protein. And then the carbs are anywhere from 16 of our highest all the way down to 3 as our lowest. So
and then total like about 1,000 calories. For
they're all 1,000.
They're all 1,000 calories, and you had one every single day on your way down to 3.9% body fat.
Yeah, I went every single day. That's my staple.
So, I mean, did you use that? Like, was that the meal, or was that part of the entire meal of the day?
Part of the entire meal. So my prep meals generally were, some form of ground meat, typically lamb or like a beef, a ruminant preferably, with some eggs, and then, duck fat or some fat source like that to ramp that up, plus the keto brick. And that, depending on my macros, were pretty much my go-tos.
It's kind of easy to track your macros if you only eat once a day.
Yeah, super easy. And I'll typically do 2 meals when I'm at a, surplus or maintenance, and then, slightly into a deficit. But once I drop down, I do the 1 meal, and I just found that to be better.
Mm-hmm. And then from a cardio perspective, to get down to that 3.9, did you do any cardio?
Yeah, Stairmaster. So I do like a minimum viable dose approach to cardio. I want most of the compositional changes to come from nutritional manipulations. But once I start plateauing with that, I'll titrate the cardio up very, very slightly. So I'll start at like 10, 15 minutes at level 10 or 15 on the Stairmaster. Ooh. And I'll just scale that up gradually over time.
That's going pretty hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I like the Stairmaster because it's easy to standardize. Like level 10 is always level 10. You're not going to have a deviation based off how you're feeling that day. So I can kind of like be very regimented on how I'm manipulating that, same as my macros, and just scale that up as needed throughout the prep.
When I was getting ready for a bodybuilding show, I started my cardio early in the morning, and I would just go to the gym and just blindly just crank the thing up to like 12 on the Stairmaster. And I would do that for a few minutes. And then once I sort of like woke up, then I would actually like lower it down to like 8 or 6 or something like that. Something more that was more manageable for me. But it was interesting because I could get through, 8 or 10 minutes, like almost half asleep.
Yeah, I don't look at the clock while I'm the Stairmaster. I can't look at the time remaining. Like that's the only time I allow myself to watch a YouTube video. So I'll plug that on the screen and I'll just, put my head down and grind. And then when it's over, it's over.
Yeah. And so how does your body feel on, that diet and then getting depleted that far and jumping on the Stairmaster, running at a level 12 and all that stuff? Like, how does your body feel?
I feel pretty good. I mean, I feel, when you're at the very end, you definitely feel depleted. Like you've got to, mentally prepare yourself to open up a heavy door. I mean, everything's just harder. But like mentally, I feel on cloud 9 at that point. But when you're down, sub 5%, like things start changing, man. Like your hair stops growing, you stop going to the bathroom, like your body's just running on fumes, So it's not healthy, it's not sustainable. My testosterone dropped quite a bit once I got down to sub 5. So there's no libido really at that point, naturally. But, that's why you don't stay there. Then you reverse that back up and everything, improves and you're running on all 8 cylinders again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I would imagine just because you are on a higher fat diet that you are able to keep the hormones a little bit healthier versus depleting the fat, right?
Yeah. I feel like when I was doing it with a carbohydrate-based approach, I mean, my testosterone would tank then too, but then I just wouldn't feel nearly as good. I wouldn't function nearly as good. I mean, like cholesterol is precursor to testosterone. So if you've got more dietary cholesterol coming in, all that's going to be safeguarded to some extent.
We have a lot of people that come through here, and there's been some people that have come through that are about my age, and they're not in the shape they used to be in. Their body doesn't move or work the way that it used to. And I think so much of it has to do with, some of it's a little bit luck. Like I'm very fortunate that I didn't end up with like a really crazy serious injury from some of the lifting that I did. So I'm grateful and thankful for that. But I do think the way that you do things is really important. And I think for some reason, bodybuilders seem to be, it's interesting because bodybuilders are they're not resistant to the drugs.
Yeah.
It could be a new drug and I could say like barely anything about it and pass it over. And if Andrew's like a pro bodybuilder, he'll be like, yep, I'm going to do it. But if I said, hey, why don't you try this low carb diet? Because I think this will be really helpful because
I don't know, bro.
Yeah, right. And
how am I going to chase the pump?
Exactly. And they're going to be like, I'm not going to be as full. I'm not going to be as big and all these different things. And they could be right. Like bodybuilders, They have been right about a lot of things. Keto diets kind of did come from bodybuilding. I know they came from some other spots originally, but bodybuilders are the ones that sort of made it famous. I believe that Arnold and some people back in the day would utilize like a cyclical ketogenic diet here and there. But it just seems like people are pretty resistant to it. And I'm wondering, like Andrew does jujitsu, I do, running along with lifting and some various things. And so for some of the people out there that enjoy doing other sports, other athletics and stuff, do you think a keto diet can still fit for them? It works great for me. I've been promoting it for a really long time. But what's your experience been for yourself and with other people?
Yeah, man. I mean, I feel like I've had several people on my podcast that are in multiple different sports. I've got one guy that just did a world record for a swim. Like he did, I forget what the swim was, but it was like in Scotland somewhere. He did this crazy long distance swim, totally fasted. I've had several ultra endurance runners that are doing like 220 miles plus, all with a ketogenic fat adapted approach. So I haven't seen anything that would convince me otherwise that a ketogenic diet wouldn't be efficacious in a sports setting. And from a bodybuilding standpoint, certainly it's worked well for me. So I think people are just very hesitant to switch their nutrition. I mean, people hold on to their long-standing beliefs, especially bodybuilders. Like bodybuilders are very stubborn individuals. They're very experimental with some things like the drugs, and they've paved the way for a lot of new things. But when it comes to nutrition, they're just steeped in this dogma that they've been, inundated with, and they're very hard to break free from them.
Yeah, and the one thing I kind of wonder is like, so maybe it's keeping them in shape now, but what about like after their bodybuilding career is over? Yeah. And we've seen many of them still stay in shape. But we've seen this with a lot of other athletes as well. Like, and maybe, other athletes don't have the diet discipline that a bodybuilder has, but yeah, I think it's important to at least learn how to run off of not just body fat, but fat in general.
Yeah. And
to condition your body and to train yourself that way. And I think one thing that people miss about the ketogenic diet is that you get like locked in. Mm-hmm. And that's why you've been doing it for 10 years straight.
Yeah, I mean, I have no reason to deviate. Like, I feel better than I ever felt. I perform better than I ever had before. My recovery's better. My inflammation's down. Like, I don't see a reason to change it. And, like, the long-term benefits is what really excites me more so than the short-term. Like, everybody points to Mark Sisson as this guy that looks great in his older years, but nothing against him. I'm going to look way better naked than he does when I'm his age, Like, I'm just going to keep building on this framework, and then by the time I'm 87 and still killing at bodybuilding competitions, that's what I'm excited about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and guys like Mark Sisson have, been promoting, keto style diets for a long time or versions of them, and Dave Asprey and a bunch of other people that, these are people in the longevity space. These are people that, Dave Asprey with Bulletproof Coffee. These are people that are kind of iconic in the space, and there must be some reason why they've been talking about and promoting a ketogenic style diet.
Yeah, I mean, especially from like a neurological standpoint, like when you look at what ketones can do to cross the blood-brain barrier and provide energy to the brain. Like, I've got grandparents right now that are going through Alzheimer's and dementia, and I feel like so much of that would not be there if they had lived a lifetime with the ketogenic approach, So I don't want to be like that when I'm their age. I want to be able to hedge against that, and I feel like this is the best way I could do so.
Yeah, along those lines, like dementia, Alzheimer's, all those things didn't exist that long ago, and I definitely don't want to get into like, what's the optimal primal diet and all that stuff. But would you guys say that like a ketogenic diet is a more natural human diet? Because it's like, seems like maybe that was around before, fat-free cheese.
Yeah, there's certainly not any cave paintings of Hot Pockets and honey buns.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
So, I think the real basics of it are, when you kill an animal, it has skin, it has fat, it has muscle, it has all these things. And for ages and ages and ages, people have been utilizing the whole animal. Mm-hmm. We've been eating the protein and the fats. You really can't get, it's hard to get protein without fat, except for in certain situations. You got things like shrimp. You have like egg whites, but egg whites are like adulterated and sort of man-made. And even a chicken breast, if you just get the chicken breast with skin, then it has the fats in it. It's kind of hard to find stuff that's like just straight protein. And then also in nature, it's hard to find a lot of carbohydrate. And, somebody I hold in high regard that we've had on the show many times is Joel Green. And Joel's not necessarily a big fan of really doing a lot of like keto necessarily, but when you listen to him and when he talks about like kind of what we've lived off of and what we survived off of we survived off of like roots and some vegetables, some fruits, and some meat. Basically, that's what we survived off of. So you're probably not talking about a lot of carbohydrates, and I would imagine it would depend on the type of year and all that. And I agree with you. It's like, I don't know how much of this ancestral stuff we should be like digging up all the time, because we live in modern times, but it is good to know our history.
Yeah.
And it's good to know, like, what are the basics? And the basics are that we run amazingly efficiently off of protein and fats. It doesn't appear that we really need carbohydrates. The word need is a strong word, because, maybe a 400 meter or 200 meter track athlete feels that he needs the carbs, and go for it. If you feel like you need them, then you need them. But how much do you need? Do you need 1,000 grams? Do you need 800 grams? I would say that even a high level athlete playing a sport quite a bit probably only needs like 100 or 200 grams of carbohydrates in a given day. As long as they're getting their fats and proteins, they should be good.
Yeah. I mean, the brain does need some glucose, but the brain can derive all that internally through gluconeogenesis. So there's no mandatory exogenous carbohydrates that need to be consumed. And kind of like your point in nature, there's not really an instance where we would have just straight pure sugar to consume. I mean, there's always a fiber that accompanies the fruit. And, you look at modern day society now, and everything's stripped of that fiber. It's all heavily processed, and it's just all adulterated. It's just nothing is like it was. And I mean, we are living in current day and time, so we can't rewind the clock necessarily, but there wasn't near these ailments that we now see back then.
It sounds like, and I'm sure that you maybe came to these numbers in some different ways, but it sounds to me like your lower caloric intake as you got closer to your lower body fat percentage was approximately 10 times your body weight in calories.
Yeah, so I'm typically competing at around 155, 160, and at that point, my calorie intake was around 1,800 calories. So.
And that's like a sweet spot for you. Is there a different way that people should sort of calculate for them to get lean? And again, I know that that's a progression that you went down to that, but how do you usually recommend?
I mean, honestly, a lot of people will do like these massive, drops of 500 calories at a time, and I don't ever really recommend that. Like, I'll typically I'll start at my maintenance intake or slightly above it, and I'll taper away 25, 50 calories, maybe 75 calories a week, but it's very, very, very gradual. I just keep applying that pressure, and that continuous pressure forces my body to adapt via the loss in body fat. But when you start just hacking away 500 calories on a whim, you'll see some initial weight loss, then your body will plateau, and then what are you going to do? Knock out another 500 calories, and then before you know it, you're at 1,000 calories, and it's like you're just suffering. You're losing lean tissue, your metabolism's down-regulated, you're not having fun, and it's just, to me, not sustainable.
You said you had to find your protein threshold. First off, how did you find that? And then second, should somebody, like let's just say me, I train jiu-jitsu on a couple times a week, lift a couple times a week. Should I even be bothered with that? If my goal is to just like, okay, we're in January, I want to lean out by, my birthday in April. Mm-hmm. Should I even worry about that sort of thing, or just get some really cool information from Robert Sikes and be like, that's interesting. All right, now let's keep moving on.
No, I mean, I definitely think it's interesting, because when I first started doing keto, it wasn't popular. Then there's this phase where people were fearful of protein. They were worried about gluconeogenesis, so they didn't consume nearly enough protein. Now it's like the pendulum has swung so far the other direction. It's like all the protein in the world and not very much dietary fat. The answer lies somewhere there in the middle, because if you're trying to optimize for fat metabolism and you're consuming way too much protein relative to dietary fat, if you've only got so many calories to work with, then you're going to be hindering your performance. You're going to have excessive glucose. You're going to have more inflammation. Like, when I'm figuring out what my protein threshold is, I'll notice it once I start seeing a drop in ketones, a rise in glucose, more joint pain and inflammation, and more brain fog. And if I'm trying to optimize from a performance standpoint, I want to mitigate against that. So I try to figure out what that threshold is and then not exceed it.
And what are you using to measure your ketones?
I've used a bunch of different things. Like, I've used the various blood, strips, different brands. I've used CGM for glucose and a glucometer for glucose. And you don't have to use that, but I'm very analytical when I'm going through things, so I like to have the data. But you can also tell, like, when you start noticing more joint pain, like when I start really pushing the protein, I'll do a heavy leg day, and then the next couple of days my knees are just feeling it more. Whereas if I get that dialed down, then I don't have that pain and inflammation, and I can just train more frequently.
Which one do you prefer?
Between what?
Of measuring your ketones and all that.
I've used, let's see here. I've used the Keto Mojo. I've used the Bio Coach. I've used them all. They're all, they've all got different dashboards. Some are better than others, but I like the one, I use Heads Up Health to kind of sync all my data in one spot. So if it syncs with Heads Up Health, I prefer that because then I can look at all my data, my scale, my blood markers, everything, and just have a dashboard where I can see what's correlated and what's not.
Is there anything to be concerned about with a ketogenic diet? Have you noticed for yourself or any clients that you've helped? I know people always have concerns over cholesterol, but like, have you noticed anything crazy happening with? Because we have talked about like it's a good idea to introduce quite a bit of electrolytes and salt and stuff like that when you're on a ketogenic diet. Noticed anything with blood pressure, or anything unsafe? There's anything to really kind of watch out for?
No, I mean, my total cholesterol is higher, but my actual cholesterol ratio is better because my HDL is also higher, my trigs are lower. So, I mean, I do encourage people to know their labs, like get their blood work done so they kind of know what their baseline is before starting keto, and they just keep tabs on that. But I don't think there's any inherent risk to doing it long term. A lot of people worry about, females specifically, hormonally, if they're irregular with their cycle. But what I noticed there is a lot of people that are noticing adverse outcomes from keto is that they do it to lose weight. So they're just staying at it too low of a caloric intake for too long, and that's going to cause some hormonal implications. But if you do keto, but then have periods of time where you're eating at a surplus, you can hedge against that. But you should do that regardless of the diet you're following.
I would also say that your whatever you change to that seems irregular is probably actually just normal.
Yeah, yeah.
If you were on a shitty diet beforehand,
For sure.
If you weren't dieting beforehand and then you try a diet and you're like, oh man, now I only crap once a day, or like something, you think something weird happened. It's like, well, that something weird is probably a good change, but also the change might not be permanent. It might just be something. Sometimes if you're going to all of a sudden, you're going to listen to this podcast and you're like, all right, I'm going to have, a gram of fat per pound of body weight. And I'm going to do the same with protein. And you do it out of nowhere and your body's not trained to handle any of that. Well, your stomach might bother you quite a bit, right? You might have some indigestion and stuff like that, but that won't bother you probably for that long.
Yeah, digestion's a funny thing. I mean, it takes like 2-3 weeks for the gut microbiome to kind of reacclimate to any new shift. So like I would encourage people to give it a few weeks before they decide yay or nay. But like people will argue in the comment section about, oh, you're not eating fiber, you must never shit. It's like they've clearly never done a ketogenic diet because it's not the case. I mean, all these just deep-rooted beliefs around what you need from
slides right out.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, regularity is normal. Everything's fine. People just got to give it the time it takes.
So we're talking about getting lean. We're talking about getting shredded. And I know you talked about, bringing the calories down kind of over a long period of time. We did talk a little bit about the protein to fats being like 1-to-1. We did talk about like one meal a day. Where are some places that people should start? Like, should people start with like 2-3 meals a day, just get used to keto? Like, what do you usually recommend to kind of just get going?
Yeah, a lot of people just need to figure out what their current baseline is. Like, they have no idea what their current caloric consumption is, what their protein grams are, what their body fat percentage is, what any of their blood markers are. Like, figure out where you're at before you start anything drastically different. That way if you don't know where you're at, you can't know where you're going, as the saying goes. So like I try to just get a good baseline established first. Make sure that you're a good candidate to lose body fat, because if you're only consuming, 1,200 calories a day, and right now, I mean, you're not going to be a great candidate for dropping into a massive extreme fat loss phase. So figure out where your baseline is currently, and then, kind of reverse engineer from there and give yourself enough time to diet down. Like if you've got 50 plus pounds to lose, you may be better off cycling through that fat loss phases, multiple times, as opposed to trying to do it all in one fell swoop. Because when you start losing lean tissue, that's not good either. You want to kind of preserve that as best you can.
Man, this seems like a hell of a balancing act.
It is a little bit, yeah.
Because like if your fats go down too low and your protein comes up, the joints might hurt. You might be actually leaning out quite a bit, but then you might kind of be feeling like shit, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just you're constantly like spinning these plates, and you got to kind of make sure each plate is still going, right?
Yeah, but once you do it enough times, like it just becomes second nature. Like a lot of people are not in tune with their body. Yeah, they don't know what they don't know. But once you actually hone into what your body's telling you, you can intuitively know what you need and what you need to remove. So it becomes much easier over time for sure.
How about bulking and cutting?
Yeah, so I mean, I stay strict keto throughout the build phase too. I just basically eat at a higher caloric intake, so I'll transition into a surplus. So my maintenance intake is like 3,300 calories. I'll bump that up to 35, maybe 4,000 if I'm trying to be aggressive, and I'll just increase the intensity and overall training volume, and then make sure I'm getting ample recovery and sleep. And that's
what are those 4 boxes that you talk about? There's 4 boxes that you check for kind of like hypertrophy, right?
Yeah, so enough protein, enough calories for fuel, ample training stimulus, and then ample recovery. Like if you get those 4 boxes, then you're going to grow.
And carbs.
No, I didn't put that in there.
Are you sure?
No carbs necessary.
Can't we sprinkle in a little bit of carbohydrate?
No carb necessary. It's funny too, because like some people point to insulin, being an extreme growth agent. It's like you get more insulin, you're going to have more growth. But like when I look at other competitors that I'm competing against that are very heavy-handed on the carbs, it's like, they put on more body fat because, insulin creates all tissue growth. So they have to diet down more aggressively to compete. They wind up losing more muscle than I do. So at the end of the day, when we step on stage, they don't bring a better package than me. So it's like, what argument do you give me for carbs,
What do your macros look like when you're stepping on, right around the time you're getting on stage? What's the...
Like the day of?
Well, what's the lowest amount of fat that you get to?
I don't ever really go, I never go below 100 grams. I mean, I'm typically, 120
so I want
grams at
to
the
point out
lowest.
that is insanely unconventional.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know everyone's business, but like a typical bodybuilder, a professional bodybuilder.
30 grams.
That weighs 250 pound guy getting on stage being jacked as fuck might eat 30 to 60 grams. 60 grams of fat might be on the higher end.
Yeah, I never get below 100. Normally never below 120. And I'll start as high as 300 or 350.
That sounds so much more enjoyable.
It is. You feel more satiated. You feel better. You have less joint pain and inflammation. I mean, honestly, like I'm excited about other people, other competitors. And it's not just me. Like I've coached other competitors that have gotten their pro card with this approach. And it's like they've done the other diets too. And they just tell me how much better they feel with this approach. So I feel like, especially from a natural bodybuilding standpoint, it makes a lot more sense. But it's just not the mainstream thing right now.
So if you got one meal and you got like 100 grams of fat,
Let's go.
and you got around 200 grams of protein, that's a pretty sizable meal right there.
Yeah, man. Keto brick, a big old bowl of meat with some duck fat on top, and I'm happy.
Are there
amazing.
are there any I don't want to say drawbacks because that's not the right term, but like let's say you're in the middle of a workout, you're starting to get depleted, and you're like, man, some intra workout carbs might be pretty good right now. Is there anything like that where you're kind of like, oh, this keto thing, like we're still doing it, huh?
No, I've never felt that. Like some people will do like a targeted keto with like peri-workout carbs, pretty minimal, like some honey or something like that, some
Bunch of
dextrose.
pussies.
Yeah. But I've never done that. I've never felt that I needed to. I'll have like electrolytes intra-workout, and that helps. Sometimes I'll have like some L-carnitine and MCT oil mid-workout. Like my wife did a powerlifting meet, and then that's kind of what she uses her pre-workout pump was L-carnitine, like a caffeine-free stimulus, and then like some MCT oil, because that's pretty fast-acting fat. But yeah, I don't ever feel like I'm depleted intra-workout and in need of carbs at all.
And you personally don't really use exogenous ketones.
No, I played around with them. I don't use them for fat loss necessarily. Like I'll play around. Like people ship me, exogenous ketones all the time, and I'll like try them, but I don't ever use them with the intent of expediting my fat loss or anything like that.
They seem like they might not really make sense for fat loss unless you're using them combined with maybe some fasting or something, because it is
There's no caloric load to them.
Yeah, there's like a little bit of it. It's an energy source, right?
Yeah, I use them more when I'm in a surplus and I'm really pushing the envelope with my training. I'll use it like as an anti-inflammatory agent, to have that, or from like podcasting, maybe a cognitive boost, with the ketones, higher circulating ketones, but I don't really use them on a consistent basis at all.
All right. Well, we gave you as much as we possibly can on how to get shredded. Robert, where can people pick up your keto brick? Where can they check out your book, and where can they check out all the keto savageness you got going on?
Yeah,
definitely tell them about the course too.
Oh yeah,
that course is incredible.
The inner course?
Yes.
The inner course. So ketobrick.com for the bricks, Keto Brick on social, Keto Savage on social. The course is basically a massive comprehensive library of these 7 phases. That's ketobodybuilding.com. And we're actually launching our first competition. So we're going to be hosting a competition in September of this year.
Awesome.
That's at naturalstatesavages.com. So if anybody interested in competing, come on out.
That's amazing. Yeah, the course is so well put together, and Robert's doing these. He does live calls. Is that weekly now?
Yeah, weekly live calls. We got the course. We got a tribe membership. We got our own custom built AI program that like takes the guesswork out of everything. It's like my brain in your pocket.
Right.
It's pretty legit, man. I'm proud of it,
dude. It is. No, that is one of the coolest things I've seen. Thank you for giving me access to it. I gotta like really jump on there. But no, it's like you just said, like if you want full on direction, full on coaching, like this is the platform to do it on. It's wild. You did a really good job on it.
Appreciate that, man.
Yeah,
it means
absolutely.
a lot.
Yeah.
I highly recommend, strongly recommend you check out the Keto Bricks. They are just amazing. Robert, you've done such a great job with your business. It's been cool to see what a savage you are from an entrepreneurial standpoint, because congrats to you. I say it all the time. Like, you got the biggest balls of them all with 1,000 calorie bar.
That should be our tagline right there.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I mean, seriously, it should be. And then also, too, I think it's worth pointing out, you and I together made the first bar that's about as carnivore as you can get. I know that some other people, strung together some tallow and other disgusting things into a bar. Yeah. I don't think they did a very good job. This actually tastes amazing, and it also can fit in within a ketogenic diet. I realize for some of the carnivore people that are really into that diet, it may not be for them because they don't want any cocoa and any this or that. So that's understandable, but you and I did it together, and the bars that we've done collaboratively also have liver, kidney, heart, spleen, small amounts of it, but it's still in there.
Yeah, it tastes like it's legit, man. It's good. Like, I eat one every single day, and I gravitate to those flavors.
They taste absolutely incredible. So check out Keto Brick. Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later. Bye.